think that if something is worth forgetting, it needs to be forgotten. What you remember then becomes important. Don't write anything down. Leave it. Because what you're waiting for is not an idea, it's a melody, it's a rhythm, it's a sound. Whatever it is, you've been waiting for it.
Colm Tóibín, celebrated Irish novelist, returning in his new book to a place he discovered as a young man. Tell me, Colm, about what Spain meant to you when you arrived there aged about 20.
So many of the things that were happening were so close to things that had happened in Ireland in the years leading up to independence. So I'm talking about the feelings of love for your country, that your country has been victimised. There were so many things that fascinated me because they echoed Ireland.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Mishal Husain Show. I think the first Colm Tóibín book I ever read was the incredibly successful Brooklyn, later made into a film with Saoirse Ronan in the leading role. But in the years since, I have appreciated this writer of fiction and non-fiction more and more. I am far from the only one. He has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize 3 times. He's able to write from within the head of a female as well as a male protagonist, and able to capture attention through dialogue and also convey silence. With a new novel called The Bridge coming out, there was a chance to speak to him. And when I read an advanced copy and compared it to what I knew of his life, I realised Colm Tóibín has used that book to return to a place that is meaningful to him, the north of Spain. He himself is from a small town south of Dublin, though he lives these days mostly between Los Angeles and New York, where he teaches at Columbia. As ever, there are written notes to accompany this episode, my notes, and you'll find them at bloomberg.com/Mishal. That's where Bloomberg subscribers get a deeper sense of what we discuss, the history and politics, for example, behind the places in Colm's writing. And with that, we can dive in precisely where the conversation begins. Hello, Colm. Can you hear me?
I can, of course. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much for talking to us. You're in LA, correct?
Well, thanks for having me. I am, yes, this morning in LA.
Well, thanks for taking the time. And I want to tell you right at the start that I really enjoyed reading The Bridge. It's fantastic. I found it really moving.
The Bridge. Oh, great.
Well,
you're probably the first person who said that. I mean, you're the first person who wasn't involved in its production who has read it. So that's just great.
I thoroughly enjoyed being taken into this world. And I was thinking that the last time you and I spoke, it wasn't face-to-face, unfortunately, but I think it was when the film of Brooklyn was coming out. So it must be more than 10 years ago now, 2015 that was.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's funny the way this time goes, isn't it?
I'd love to begin with The Bridge, because there is so much that I want to explore with you about the world that you've created in that book. I wonder, first of all, how you would describe it, the plot and the setting. Introduce us, if you like, to The Bridge.
There's a part of the Catalan Pyrenees called the Pallars, and there's a part of the Pallars called Pallars Sobirà. And that area was, for all the centuries, cut off from the rest of the world because there was no bridge. It was a footbridge merely across the river. And you can imagine if you're a smuggler, because Andorra is not very far away. And for really, all the time, all the cigarettes, all the brandy, all the rum, everything you need comes down by smugglers from Andorra. And of course, if you're a smuggler, the idea of a new bridge, is the new bridge going to be good or bad for us? Is it going to mean easier access to the other side? Or is it going to mean it'll be easier for us to be caught? So that's really how the story begins. There's a man and his son, and they're watching out, and you realize that they really don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
That they're just not smart, they're not cunning, they're not strategic. And of course they will be caught. They will be the first to be caught on the new bridge. And my job is to try and make you see the world through the eyes of the son, Miguel, to sort of immerse you in the way he notices things and feels things. He's obviously extremely sensitive. He's gay. This is 1950-something. This is a rural part of Spain. You wonder, how is he going to manage? And then you wonder, when they get imprisoned for being smugglers, how they're going to manage a prison sentence.
So I'm fascinated that you're telling me it's set in the 1950s, because as I read, I was trying to figure that out. Because even though it's a young man seeing a time of change around him, there's not only the bridge being built, but there's roads being built. But I almost felt it could be any time from the 50s, even possibly through to the 70s. So I thought there's this weird combination of time changing, and yet at least I was a bit unsure about which decade exactly this was set. But it's a part of Spain you know, right?
Oh yeah, I've been going there since I think 1976. So I've been going there for, is that 50 years? But yeah, I've been going there for all that time. So I sort of know the landscape. I suppose one of the clues about the time is that they're smuggling styluses for record players. And
Mm,
that suggests a sort of time slightly later when people have more record players.
yeah.
And obviously they smuggle condoms as well.
Yes. And I found myself also, I have to tell you, the few place names there are in it right at the beginning, I found myself looking up these places and figuring out like how many people live there. And I realized that Lavarsi has a population of 343 and
Oh
Rialp,
yeah.
the next town down, is 654. So
Yeah, these are remote, small villages in which everything is watched and everything is known, in which they sort of protect you in some ways, but repel you in others. And so Miguel and his father have already had to leave a village for being very unpopular, and they've arrived in this new one. And in a way, the prison itself is a sort of village.
yes, that has its own life. And obviously we're not going to give the story away, but I found many elements of it really moving. Tell me, Colm, about what Spain meant to you when you arrived there, aged about 20, around the time of Franco's fall. What did it give you? What did it open up to you?
What happened in Spain before Franco's death is a sort of big change. The big change probably happened in 1968 and 69. So the young people, it wasn't as though there was a sudden moment in November 75 when Franco dies and everything begins to change. I think in people's minds and in families and in relationships, the change had already taken place. And now we were getting its public manifestation. I arrived in Barcelona in September 1975. And what was absolutely fascinating was how little hope people had then that any change was going to take place in the public realm. People saw the king as a sort of puppet for Franco. They saw fascism as something that was likely to continue. But slowly underneath all this, in places of power, people were getting ready to introduce democracy very, very quickly. And this, in its manifestation for me, was massive demonstrations for amnesty, for freedom, for democracy, things that were already coming in any case. So that while there were baton charges at the very beginning, and there was tear gas, that really faded out. Really, by the spring of 1976, it was absolutely clear to everybody that they were marching for something they already had.
Mm.
And then divisions began. I mean, I saw a barman in a bar I would go to in a march as a communist. I had no idea he was a communist. But the big thing that happened in Barcelona was the Catalan movement, was the revival of Catalan nationalism and its emergence in two particular forms, one being sort of socialist nationalism and the other being much more conservative nationalism. Because I'm Irish, so many of the things that were happening were so close to things that had happened in Ireland in the years leading up to independence. Obviously, it didn't include the 1916 rebellion, but I'm talking about the ingredients. I'm talking about the feelings of love for your country, that your country has been victimized by this larger country that would emerge in singing, that would emerge in dancing, that would emerge in culture of various types, including in Barcelona, of course, football, which was very close to the Gaelic Athletic Association in Ireland, the hurling and Gaelic football, the way in which sport was commandeered to be part of the cultural movement that should lead eventually to political independence. And of course, fetishizing various places in the landscape. A place called Canigo or Montseny, or even the Pyrenees, the whole Catalan Pyrenees, was considered the real home, the sort of ancient home of the Catalans.
Yeah.
And so that there were so many things that fascinated me because they echoed Ireland, but also I understood them through the lens of Ireland, as it were.
Yeah, I still can't help thinking what an immense contrast, though, to your life growing up in a very small town in Ireland and then being in Barcelona at this incredibly intense, febrile, still quite uncertain time, even if everyone was sure that, democracy was coming.
Look, some of it is almost funny in retrospect, where I really didn't know, or I didn't know much, that you were meant to enjoy food. My mother used to say, "Eat that now. You don't eat to enjoy it, you eat to live." And no one in Barcelona believed that. The entire pleasure taken over the table, over going with friends to eat, over restaurants, how cheap restaurants were, and how good the food was. The pleasure people took in color, in beauty, in painting walls, in the sort of architecture of the city, both in the 14th century city and the 19th century city. There was a whole sense of soaking in vast quantities of beauty and beautiful food, beautiful looking people. The whole way life was conducted was to give pleasure to the population. In Ireland, we really had a lot of rain and drizzle, and that often gave way to mist and rain. The pubs closed early, and there's a general sense of life as a sort of punishing thing. But the other thing was, of course, that I was gay, and there were no gay bars in Barcelona then. They came very quickly by 77, say. But because there were no gay bars, there were streets that were just entirely filled with gay men at night. That certainly wasn't true in Dublin. And there was no shame, I could tell you. And so there was a lot of excitement that has never really. I still can walk through Barcelona going, with the whole sense of newness and excitement and pleasure.
Yeah. I did wonder about that side of freedom, the sexual freedom, and what it meant to you as a young man at that time in your life. And of course, Spain's been there in a number of your books in fiction and non-fiction. Were you at this point already writing, or already sure that writing was what you wanted to do?
No, I was not. I was a failed poet. I think there are large numbers in every country, really, but in Ireland, it's a particular thing where you realize at a certain age, I must stop because there's so many good poets around that I get caught out as being a bad one. And so I had really written very seriously as a poet, like from 17, 18, 19, 20. By the time I went to Barcelona, I had stopped. And I had no idea how to write fiction or anything about fiction. And the only thing I wrote were letters home. And so for 3 years, I wrote nothing. And I wonder if this wasn't a good thing, that somehow or other it left me a lot of material to use or to soak up. And that I think what's important is that I wasn't thinking, oh, I can use this for a book when something was happening. That it all came fresh and raw and unmediated. And that isn't the case now. For example, if I were somewhere and there was some excitement going on, I'd start framing it and thinking about it and watching it. There was all free. There was no sense of this material could be anything other than personal, private, and all the more fun for that.
But memories do lead to books, right? Later on. And I wondered if there are images from this, like there are people you remember or distinct places even, because I think at one point you lived in a village in the Pyrenees. You weren't always living in Barcelona.
Yeah, I think what really gives you impetus is loss. So after 3 years, in 1978, I went back to Ireland. I went back to Ireland partly because I was always going to be an outsider in Catalonia. I couldn't vote in elections, and I always spoke with a funny accent. And I wanted to go home. But the going home then left me with this massive experience, filled with richness, filled with detail, filled, as you say, with things that are really not only to be savored, but can never be forgotten. And my job was now in those years to put shape on that experience, to find a metaphor, to find some character who would go through what I went through. So it wouldn't be autobiographical as much as it would be a novel. And yes, I had friends of mine had gone to live in that village in the Pyrenees. That's in the bridge. And I went up there a lot, spent a lot of time there. Later on, I went there much, much more. I mean, in recent years, I tend not to stay in Barcelona as much as go to the village. It's just about middle age into old age. You want to just be somewhere really, really quiet. But the memories remained, and it remained sort of unresolved experience that I needed in some way that I'd done nothing with. I missed this place. I remembered this place. And what I got next then was a way of registering all of that in a story I could tell in a novel. And that was my first novel, The South.
And Ireland to you today, because you're in the US talking to us, you've essentially made your home in the US for decades now. How rooted are you in the Irish side of your identity today?
um, I I read the Irish Times every night before I go to sleep, and I might check it once or twice during the day. I talk to friends every day on the phone in Ireland. I keep thinking I'm absolutely up to date on what's going on in Ireland, and that I'm almost like a lot of people in America, um, that I'm actually living in the old country. I think much more consciously than I'm actually in America. Now, this sounds true, but it is, of course, it isn't. This year on Good Friday, which famously Irish pubs were closed by law on Good Friday. But 15 years ago, this changed. So if you've been living in Ireland, you've forgotten about this law. But I said to someone on Good Friday, it must be hard today, but the pub's closed. And she said, "You are in exile syndrome. This had like this is the past. This is the country you left. Forget about it. The pubs are wide open. They're packed with people. Would you stop trying to invent an Ireland of your own memory?" I felt suitably chastened that you think you're actually living in Ireland, and I go back and forth quite a lot. And I have a house in Wexford in Ireland, and I think I'm there. I think I really haven't left at all, but that's not true.
I find it fascinating that level of, keeping up with the news of Ireland to the extent you do. Like, does that mean you're also really politically engaged in Ireland? I'm imagining, like, let's say if there is to be a border poll and there's a campaign on a reunited Ireland, could you imagine yourself actively campaigning?
Yeah, it's a very serious matter, and it has to be worked out very slowly and carefully in advance, not on matters of emotion. Do you feel you'd love to be in the United Ireland? That's no use. What's this going to do for health? Is the NHS in the Northern Ireland going to close? If so, under what circumstances? How is Northern Ireland to be policed? Is it to be policed from Dublin using Dublin-led police in difficult parts of Belfast, for example? What's going to happen to education? Now, also, the big question is what's going to happen to money? I think that the question has to be in what way will this improve the lives of people? Forget territory, think people.
You're right. The detail is obviously really important. But if you think about the Scottish independence campaign or the Brexit referendum, those tend to be emotional rather than hard nosed in that way. And I wonder if you're saying actually that um, you would discourage it or you fear what it might unleash.
I think it's really important in a campaign that you're ready to answer all these bread and butter questions. And I was tangentially involved in the gay marriage referendum in Ireland. And we were ready. I mean, the campaign was ready every day. If anyone spreads a rumor, to immediately get involved. In a referendum campaign, you really have to have a central headquarters that is run by people who have really done this before, who know a lot about elections. And unfortunately, neither the Scottish nor the Brexit one was. I mean, I was upset by the result of both. That they weren't run by people who were looking after what people really cared about and making the argument every single day.
As a writer, how do you maintain the balance between being engaged in the world, which you clearly are, and creating that that sacred space for your own writing?
Um, I mean, I'm just someone who can't say no. So if something interesting comes my way, if someone suggests something I should write, a libretto for an opera, or a set of songs, or or write a big article on some subject, I'm going to do that. And I teach one semester a year. So, but actually, oddly enough, the year's 12 months, and if you could devote 5 of them to writing a novel, that's actually quite a lot of days. If you're writing 1,000 words a day, which you should be doing, then you should really be able to complete a novel in that period if you really concentrate. And it's nice because sometimes you think, well, this is my time for writing a novel. If I don't use this, I'll be back at Columbia teaching and I won't have the novel written. There are writers who just write their fiction. I wonder what that's like where you wake in the morning and think, I don't really have to do it today because I can do it tomorrow. And I could do it next month, and I could do it next season, I could do it next year. I never feel like that. I feel this is an emergency. This is an emergency, and it has to be done. If it isn't done, I'll lose it. It'll be too late next year. So it actually, oddly enough, gives you a sort of impetus, or at least a concentration, or a discipline, or a way of functioning that really, really means you know what you're doing, not
Mhm.
only today but this month.
So your day, like right now, a typical day, will you plan it or you have a routine that means you sit down at a certain time and this is your writing time or this is your media time? Like how, on a day-to-day basis, how do you organize it?
I've just written down here on my right the list of things to be done today. And I have to finish this essay I've been working on the Irish revival. I have to write an email to a friend, quite a long one about something serious. Um, I have to read 3 or 4 short stories. And I have to begin writing an essay on a poem, 500 words, to try and deliver this week, plus 2 longer pieces. But all the time, I have a novel in my head that I am working out the details of, that in stray moments, as I'm crossing the room, it could happen anytime I could get another image for. I will start writing the novel sometime towards the end of the year. Certainly early next year. I'm not teaching next year, so certainly January and February. And I think I have the opening now. It's also important not to start until you're sure you're ready to start. Don't force an opening image, that it must seem natural, it must seem like breath, the sentences in an opening of a novel. It must seem like something that the melody came easily. And in order for that to happen, you have to give the melody time, and forcing it would show, and you'd end up dropping it, abandoning it, erasing it. So I'm probably working harder on a novel than I think, by letting these days go by without deliberately setting about writing. But I've got other things to do, all of which involve words.
You've got a pen in your hand right now as you're talking.
I
And that
certainly
made me
do.
wonder, so that opening to the next novel, is it just in your head or have you written down a paragraph or two?
I don't take notes. I think that if something is worth forgetting, it needs to be forgotten. What you remember then becomes important. Don't write anything down. Leave it. Because what you're waiting for is not an idea, it's a melody, it's a rhythm, it's a sound. Even if the first sentence of the novel seems rhythmically not very interesting, it has a rhythm. And whatever it is, you've been waiting for it. And so someday, when the winter comes, I will write it down.
I love that. But your work ethic is also, I find it slightly shaming because what you get through in one day.
Oh, it's not an ethic. I just drift into things and then I do them.
I'm also curious about the connection between the writing and the real life events because I saw that there's one of the short stories in this book, The News from Dublin, which is a collection, is about an Irishman who's undocumented in the US and decides to leave the country before ICE come for him, essentially. And I wondered whether you had been thinking about that for a long time or it was the re-election of Donald Trump that made you sit down and write that.
Yeah, I don't have any stories on the go, short stories at the moment, but I did have. And in 2008, I taught for a quarter at Stanford, and I was living in San Francisco. And so I was hanging around. I was open for anything. I would go to Irish bars, but I went on a hike up into Muir Woods, up into Mount Tam, and it was that walk that got me going with that story. I was with 3 friends. Soon I was going to leave the city. So I was aware that this beautiful Californian sky, the trees, the Pacific Ocean below, and that a whole sense of pleasure in the landscape was going to disappear. I was going to lose it. And so I did at that time write down the beginning of a story, which was about that walk up that mountain and the idea of losing it, the idea of this being like the Moor's last sigh, that this last view of this beauty. I wrote the opening in a notebook. It wasn't the opening I eventually used, but it wasn't a note as much as the actual sentences of a story. And I always knew that I could go back to it any time and finish it just when the notion took me. And then Donald Trump got elected the second time. And I realized that second time, it was clear to anybody that it was much more ominous and it was uglier. And the business of using ICE, and the fact that ICE would detain you rather than deport you. And I thought about I knew a lot of people who came over to America in the 80s and 90s, and indeed later, just on a tourist visa, just ventured in, found work, and got on with their lives. were paying taxes, they had families. But I guess all of these people are watching this very closely. While the main impulse seems to be to deal with people who are Latino, it wouldn't be impossible for someone Irish to be also detained.
Mm.
And so I sat down. The important thing for me was that I would try and set this in real time. I'd never done this before. So the big walk up the hill happens on the Saturday before Trump's inauguration. My hero, such as he is leaving the country on the Monday, on the day of the inauguration. He will be out of the country before Trump speaks. So the idea would be that on that very Saturday, I set about writing the main body of the story, getting up really early, like getting up at 6, and working solidly all day, as though that day was a week. And simply, blocking it into, I will do 1,000 words now, then there'll be breakfast, then I'll do 1,000 words, there'll be lunch, then there'll be 1,000, so that I did really write as more than half, yeah, a good lot of the story. On the day the story takes place, which is the Saturday before Trump's second inauguration. And it was a real pleasure in thinking they don't know where to park the car. But if I actually almost, if I had a surveillance camera, I could find them a parking space in that very parking spot that's open now. And so I had a sense of now, urgent. It was just something I did, but it was a nice feeling of trying to get the character out of America before Trump speaks.
The poignant thing about that character is that he's got a child in America with an American mother, and he'll be able to leave without a problem, but he won't ever be able to come back to the US, and therefore he's dependent on his daughter deciding to come and visit him. He'll never be able to come and visit her in her home country.
Yeah, he'll lose her teenage years, and I didn't want him to be an upstanding citizen in some way. He's a bit of a chancer, and it's not exactly that he's not exactly um, a sort of role model, but that was very important for the story that he was just someone ordinary, and this happens to the story was published in the New Yorker about 3 weeks after it was written. So I think it probably was the first story about Trump's second term. But I'm not proud of being the first, but just that it was on my mind. I did it. I got, and I finished it in time and all
Have you considered leaving America, going back to Ireland, or do you feel this is
that.
now your permanent home?
um, my partner's here, and we're sort of settled. Um, I come and go a lot just for work. There are various other things I have to do. So I think everyone who could has thought about leaving. At what point would you leave? What would they have to do in America for you to feel this is it? I'm out of here now. And we keep hoping, keep hoping for the midterms, keep hoping for the next election, keep hoping, keep hoping. And but if you look at history, that's what people did in other places at other times as well. So yeah, it's something I suppose we will all have to do if things get much worse.
So you have, I mean, you have entertained the idea.
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. But it would be a pity, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've made it your home for so long. Has it changed your sense of America? I mean, I just wonder if you have a sense of disappointment, or it's not the place you first came to. I mean, there's no doubt that immigration enforcement and crackdowns and anti-immigration sentiment is happening in so many countries, including Ireland.
Yeah, it seems an extraordinary idea that you demonize the very people who are sort of looking after you, who are going to be there when you're dying, are going to be cleaning the floors of the hospital, are going to be taking the work that other people are not taking. It just makes absolutely no sense, and it's sad that politicians have not said we actually need as many immigrants as possible. We need to open our doors even wider because we've got an aging population. If you look at the former East Germany, there's a desperate need for people to come. If you look at the center of Spain, if you look at Castile in Spain, there's a desperate need for more people to come. So it seems that the strangest group to demonize will be people coming to your country looking for work. I went on a tour. I mean, I really did quite a lot of readings when the Book of Stories came out in the spring. And I got to see a sort of America that people wouldn't believe. People are just so sweet and so nice and so literate and so interested in ideas. You keep wondering, like, where, where is this ugliness? Where is it hidden? And it's probably hidden in the very people that are sweet one minute and they have, horrible views the next. And certainly there are places I've been where I realized that in this audience, there are people not only who voted Trump, but who absolutely believe that. I remember someone saying to me, as though I would agree about Mamdani. whereas I love Mamdani, said, "Isn't it awful what's happened? It's a city, you know, I was brought up in that city. I love that city. It's horrible to see something like that happening to a place you love." I said, "What are you talking about? You're talking about Mamdani." And so, yeah, people have extraordinary views, and they seem to have them in huge numbers. And the thing is, I'm an outsider. I don't see that. I think you'd need to have a Republican uncle and be able to work out how he had evolved politically. Not being American, you just can't make any sense. You can't make any sense of that.
I did wonder if this period might have made you even more productive, because I read something you had said about the thing to do at a moment like this is to close the door and get on with making books. When politics has failed, the imagination can come to the fore, and you you are really prolific. I mean, you that has been your way, but you know, look at the number of things you're doing right now.
I did feel that when Trump was elected the second time, that you know, that the books and music, that the idea of sitting in the evening listening to a string quartet was almost a political act. That trying to find something gracious in culture, trying to find something that was beautiful and that dealt with the solitary soul and dealt with the human spirit at its most exalted, that these things perhaps mattered more in a time where the sort of rhetoric was so ugly, but also a level of supreme vulgarity in relation to public speech or public imagery. And the funniest time I've seen this, and I must write this down sometime, is the second election of George W. Bush. People on the Upper West Side of New York weren't happy, and they wondered what to do the following night. And I was involved in a very small event about Proust with a number of other Proustians, where we were going to talk to a very small audience about some matter to do with Proust. And as the day went on, the number of bookings increased. And by the end, we were in the Bartos Hall, which is the biggest hall of the New York Public Library. I think it holds 1,000 people. And it was packed. People were standing at the back. They were desperate to be somewhere where they could be with other people like themselves, where they could be with something that was so far away from George W., from Republicans, from politics, that I thought, I looked into the hall and thought, culture is great the way high culture has a great purpose at certain moments, where it actually gave people a sense there is a community I'm part of. This is the community I'm part of. That idea somehow that culture becomes a sort of haven. I think particularly with chamber music and poetry.
You've done something
I'm not.
really.
I'm not suggesting I'm not suggesting they'll save us, but I'm suggesting they'll console us.
That they're a
It's a
refuge.
different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe not everyone came to that evening as a Proust fan, but they knew it was something they needed at that particular point in time. You've done something really striking for other writers when you co-founded your own publishing imprint, and you had read the Hungarian writer Laszlo Krasner, Hawkeye, and you wanted to make sure that he was distributed in the UK. How much does that mean to you, and does it come from a sense of responsibility or a sense of passion as a reader rather than a writer?
Yeah, it really was extraordinary when I was in Stanford the first time, in 2006. There was a postdoc student there called Daniel Medin who introduced me to the work of Laszlo Krasner-Hawkeye, published by New Directions in the United States. And I thought it was an astonishing idea that no one in the UK had published these books. They were already translated into English. And it struck me that things were becoming more and more conservative and more careful, that things were decided by a group at a meeting. And if you wanted to bring in some book that was weird or strange or in Hungarian, some would say, "Oh my God, you want a Hungarian book?" And they'd sort of laugh at you. I suppose book selling had become, I suppose, intensely commercial, including the selling of literary books, helped not only by the Booker Prize, by the rise of, 3 books for the price of 2, reductions in the price of books that were very popular, which didn't happen in Europe. In Europe, you can't lower the price of a book by law. And so, yeah, I thought be easy to get the rights to this book. It'd be just a question of trying to find an umbrella. And so we work with Profile Press. And what we're looking for is stuff that hasn't made its way through the system in England. Books that are really good books. The Krasner Hawkeye was the big one because we realized very early on just how good he was and what an important figure he was. The fact that he could um, theoretically hit a very large audience. And so I went with him to Edinburgh, and I saw it that day in Edinburgh. The very intense young men coming into the reading, people who've been reading philosophy in university, maybe sort of coming in because this writer was the one. So it wasn't a hard sell, but it was fun because there was a moment when I was standing beside the head of Penguin Random House, and she was saying how hard it was to publish translations, and I'm saying it's not. I've just done it. It's really easy, and they sell. All you have to do is put your heart into it. And it was fun saying that to her because she looked at me like I was mad, but I wasn't mad. I was right.
And he won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
He, look. He first of all he won the Booker International, and that was a wonderful night in London. To have somebody like him who, working on those sentences of his, like he goes into a frenzy of activity, like to get those long, snaking sentences, and the whole sense that he deals with of a world that's ominous, that's sort of coming after you in some way, but it's not necessarily political. It's almost comic in its sort of manicness, and yeah, he went on to win the Nobel Prize, and it was such joy to see him where he should be, honored in the way he should be. And that I was responsible for getting this book into the UK and Ireland. So he was already had been read by a lot of people. That was good.
So, Colin, before we let you go, then, what about you as a reader? What is on your bedside table right now?
The problem, in a way, is that I'm always working, and that I take on a project that means I have to read a lot of stuff around something. So I've just finished reading this book here, which has really had a big effect on me. Um, and um, and I'm reading this because I'm writing a long piece for the London Review of Books on Jacqueline Rose, the English writer who
Yeah.
has a new novel coming, and this is her sister Gillian, and who's a philosopher, and it's a sort of memoir. She's approaching death. She died quite young from cancer, and it's a very affecting book.
It's called Love's Work by Gillian Rose.
Or it's a short book. It's a Penguin classic, but it's it's a meditation on death and on what life has meant and on friendship and on the sort of messiness of things, on never being a perfect lover, never being a perfect anything, but all the time sort of muddling through. And the other book I have here is it's Tobias Wolff, and it's his short stories. Our story begins. I need to pick one of them, I suppose, to read in public, and so I'm just deciding which one that's going to be. I mean, I've read all of them, and I know him, um, and he's a friend. But what I'm doing now is every day I'm taking two or three stories and reading them. So that's part of just the general day.
I read something that you said last year, I think, about AI and how you think that AI is going to be the end of us all. I'm quoting now. It's very clear that this idea of sensibility, which we go on about a lot, no machine could ever replace my sensibility. That's all rubbish. You can actually manufacture that. And I'm going to say to you that the sensibility and the sensitivity in a book like The Bridge, your latest book, I don't think that can be manufactured. So I hope I'm right and you're wrong on that.
You see, I have to explain the context there, which is that there's an enormous difference for me, I think for everybody, in what I say and what I write. I would never have written that.
Oh, this was an interview, a dastardly interview.
I said it on the phone. I would never have written that. I would have considered every phrase of that. I would have said the opposite before saying that. Um, but I was on the phone. It just occurred to me to say, look, it's over. It's all over. And, and I got pleasure out of saying it. But if it had been given back to me in words, I would have given it back as thousands of words with some effort to consider, to make consideration. But um, I've written a series of songs for the Wexford Opera Festival, which is coming up in October. And um, the three of the songs are an AI guy who's fallen deeply in love with a girl. And he doesn't understand because he has the words. They say to her, like, what do I need to say to you to let you know how I feel? And she's saying, you're a machine. You say, look, that's not actually what I am. I am what it is I'm going to say to you. What I'm going to say to you is that there's something about you. There's something in the way you, and I love you and I want to be with you and I want you to love me. And she said, but that will never happen. Yes, he said, but I want you to know that that is how I feel. And it's in the song. He's a tenor, she's a soprano. And I don't have him boxed in a machine. I have him actually presenting himself as a human being. And I want the audience by the end of the three songs to start feeling really sorry for him.
Well, at least that means we can agree that AI is never going to write like Colm Tóibín. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak, and I'll let you get on with your day in LA and everything
Thank
that
you
you're
very
going to
much.
pack into
Okay.
it. Thank you, Colm.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, take care. Okay, bye. Bye.